Hop and Vetiver, Accidental Anarchists, Chapter 10. Cautionary Tales. "We need cords," Robert Weeks demanded. "And do you have any blankets handy?" "Sheets would be best," Isla murmured. They were setting up camp in an uninhabited jumble of red rocks. Once it had been the domain of a keeper, but something had happened and now it was deserted. Cat was exhausted. Who packs sheets on an offensive campaign? "Lord Rajani used to," Isla said, glancing to where Hop was heating wood with his hands for the campfire. Both lieutenants' faces assumed wistful expressions. He used to remember the cords, too. Cat dropped a coil of rope into Robert's arms. "You can't expect him to think of such things now that he's lost his memory," she said. "We don't have extra blankets, but you can use the awning to my tent. It's mostly just extra weight, anyway." Isla removed the canvas, then she and Robert vanished back into the grass. "What do they need that stuff for?" Vetiver asked. "They're burying the bodies." Vetiver thought back to the limp, empty skins. Not much body to bury. "Hey, come look!" Hop held a sprig of grass between his glowing thumb and forefinger. Smoke twisted around the straw, then the entire thing burst into flame. "This is awesome!" "Hop, just do your job, will you? I'm hungry." Corbin sat down by the fire ring, peeled the top from a can of beans, and licked off the lid. "You're going to cut your tongue. Is that going to be enough for all of us?" Hop asked. He cupped his hands around a pile of tinder, and it sparked to life. "Robert and Isla won't eat anything," answered Corbin. "Not until breakfast tomorrow." He gave Hop the same look Isla had, and Vetiver wanted to shout at him. How's Hop supposed to know all this stuff? Even if he hadn't lost his memory, it's been a half-dozen years. People forget things. But since she figured she didn't know enough about what was going on, she kept silent. The beans burned her tongue. After supper, Vetiver stirred the embers of the dinner fire. When Cricket was little, he'd been certain the sparks that spiraled into the sky were his alien friends, and that they turned into stars after they flickered out. Vetiver had almost believed him. "I'll take the first watch," Corbin said, wiping bean juice from his spoon into the sand. "I'll get the second one," Cat said as she stood up. "Vetiver, come on and we'll get some sleep." "I would be fine by myself," Vetiver complained as she followed Cat into the tent. Once inside, she pulled off her vest, rolled it into a pillow, and lay down. Cat always slept in her clothes in case they were attacked, but Vetiver thought that would be too hot. "Don't you want a blanket?" Cat asked as she unrolled her own. It bunched against 3 walls of the small tent. "No, it's warm enough in here." "Okay, good night." "Night." Through the thin green walls, Vetiver watched the glow of the campfire dying down. She listened to Hop and Corbin murmur an intermittent conversation, then heard Hop scuff his feet as he walked to his own tent. After that, there were no sounds, besides an occasional sigh of wind. The poor people! Vetiver couldn't sleep. She could see the gaunt woman and the starving children in her mind's eye. Those people starving while people still threw out bycatch, who cut fins off of sharks and dropped them back into the water still alive, to writhe and die. And shark fins didn't even have a taste. What a waste of life. Maybe I could start an organization that would collect sharks and bycatch and deliver it to impoverished people around the world. Why stop at bycatch? Maybe roadkill that isn't badly damaged. Maybe male Holstein calves separated from their mothers and left to die. There's so much want coexisting with so much waste. Vetiver worked out the details of her new organization for an hour. Then, as abruptly as it had come to her, she abandoned it. She knew she was deluding herself. "I can never do anything to help. I'm a waste of biomass." Vetiver saw the boy's stumpy fingers touching her arm. She heard him say, "You're so pretty." Maybe on the outside. Maybe she was pretty in comparison to the starved, ill children he was used to seeing. But what about inside? "By your acts ye shall be known." That counted for inactions as well. I'm worthless. Vetiver rolled over violently. Ow! Her shoulder pained. She reached over to massage it, then sat up. "Cat?" "Hmm?" "Can you please turn on the light?" "Yes. What is it?" Cat flicked on the flashlight suspended from the roof by a string. "My shoulder." Vetiver unfastened the top 3 buttons of her shirt and pulled her sleeve down to reveal the junction where her shoulder and neck met. What is that?" Cat's pallid face reflected in the flashlight glow. was not reassuring. It's a lump. Vetiver touched it, and it felt bigger than before. It was so swollen she couldn't look down at it, so she got up and stared into the mirror. Oh, wow. The lump was even larger than it felt, which ran contrary to Vetiver's previous experiences with lumps. What's going on? Has something like this ever happened before? Vetiver tried to remember. Maybe. It seems a little familiar. Put your hands like this. Vetiver placed Kat's hands on the opposite sides of the lump. It was almost as big as her closed fist. Now try pressing on it, just a little bit. Pus erupted from the lump like frosting from a cake decorating bag. It was the same texture as frosting, too. Kat yelped and yanked her hands away. What? Don't freak out. Vetiver felt like freaking out herself, but instead she squeezed the lump again and slapped the resulting pus down on the green tile counter. She collected almost a half cup of it. Ow, Vetiver said, wringing the last splurt of creamy matter from her shoulder. The lump deflated, but a small red hole remained where the pus had escaped. It throbbed and burned. No! Oh, please no. Is that another one? Kat's face progressed from white to green. Huh? Vetiver glanced at her other shoulder. Sure enough, a knob was pressing through her shirt on that side as well, closer to her upper arm than to her neck. She shifted her shirt over to reveal it, a more pronounced, harder-looking lump. It was slightly smaller than the first one, but growing. Why are you screaming in there? Hop wriggled through the tent door without knocking. Eatsall, has this happened to her before? What? What is this? Hurry, do something before it gets bigger, Kat commanded Hop as she inched away from Vetiver. Wait, you're a girl. You're supposed to be good at wounds and injuries and things. Just do it. Okay. Hop took the bump between two large brown fingers and pinched as hard as he could. A little drop of yellow liquid formed, but no pus. Am I doing this wrong? Kat, how am I supposed to do this? This is disgusting. I think you should scoop up from the sides more, because if you just press in the center, the pus will be forced inward instead of coming out, Kat instructed, from the safety of her blanket. Vetiver, are you okay? Vetiver swayed, then lurched over the sink. She began coughing, just a choked at first, that crescendoed up to a throaty hacking. She braced herself against the mirror, and her hand slid down the glass, leaving a chunky, cream-colored smear. Hop patted her back gingerly. Sorry, I think I messed up. Vetiver vomited. Greasy pus rolled out of her mouth. It tasted like lard, and made it hard to breathe. Nasty. Hop turned away so he wouldn't have to smell it. Kat pulled Vetiver's hair back, trying to keep it out of the pus. She frowned. Why is there a sink in my tent? Or a mirror? I don't remember packing them. The edges of the sink crumbled, then turned to sand and filtered to the ground. Soon, nothing was left but a higher spot on the tent floor. Why did you do that? Vetiver whimpered, coughing a wad of pus under her sleeve. Now I don't have anything to throw up into. Vetiver, relax. Kat stroked the girl's back. It was the only clean part of her. Another lump protruded between her shoulder blades. I think this is all in your head. Just calm down. That's right. Hop, you comfort her while I talk to Corbin. I think we need a doctor. She nudged Vetiver over to Hop and left the tent. Yuck, Hop said. He tried patting Vetiver's back and only succeeded in bursting the new lump. Wet slime seeped through her shirt. This is so nasty. Vetiver, you take gross to new heights. I feel really bad, Hop. Just relax like Kat said, Hop told Vetiver, and try not to think about it. He patted her head because it was still kind of clean, and although the gesture was awkward, it calmed Vetiver. Exhausted from the ordeal, she leaned against Hop and relaxed. Wings fluttered outside. Corbin must have transformed. I wonder if he's going to bring me a bird doctor. What? You must have a fever. That didn't make any sense. Yeah, I know. Kat came back, told Hop he could sleep in his own tent, and fell asleep in minutes. When help came the next morning, it wasn't in the form Vetiver had expected. A lanky brown man straggled into camp as they were eating breakfast. One of Corbin's crows perched on his scrawny shoulder. I'm told that you're in need of my services, he hissed. The man wore a decaying gray poncho that hung to his knees, and a coarse-woven drawstring bag was slung over his back. He didn't wear shoes. He sounded like he had a sore throat, and an angry, flaky rash covered his shins. A blue headband was pushed down over his face, covering his eyes. Greasy, wavy, mouse-colored hair spilled over his forehead. "Yes, we have a problem," Corbin said. He motioned at Vetiver to get up. She set her half-eaten plate of beans down on a flat rock and stood. Her skin was cold and clammy. Swollen purple leeches writhed out of the pale flesh on her forearms and plopped into the dirt. "I'm diseased," she said, not directing her comment to anyone in particular. Another pustule was rising on her neck. The man nodded. "It looks like it. Come with me." Vetiver glanced at Hop, who glanced at Corbin, who said, "Go on." Vetiver followed the man into the maze of candy-striped sandstone. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "First, my name's Kurogi. What's yours?" "Vetiver." "And you're from the other side." Kurogi pulled a chunk of burned wood from his pack. He scraped it against the rock wall, shaving off a spray of dust and leaving a bold black mark. The mark turned into the wing of a bird, then a dancing stick figure, then swirled into a river. Having his eyes covered didn't seem to impair Kurogi's artistic ability. In minutes, he surrounded the spot they stood with freehand symbols, drawing on the hard dirt ground in places. "What are you doing?" Vetiver asked. "How can you see to draw?" Maybe the cloth was thin enough for him to see through. Kurogi dropped the stub of wood and smacked charcoal dust from his hands. "Setting up. Do you think this circle will make us invisible?" "No. Probably not." "Well, start thinking so. People need to believe the service I do is difficult and esoteric. If they found out that anyone with talent could do it, I would be out of a job. So, Vetiver, what's been bothering you?" Vetiver sighed and picked at her arm. The leeches had dried up into hard little violet lumps. "I'm infected with something. Before that, what were you worried about when it started?" "Getting in the way and slowing everyone down. And I still am." "Of course you are, thinking that way. Haven't you figured it out yet?" "Figured what out?" "In an unstable area, you can change a lot of things just by believing them. Your belief that you are a worthless person is making you physically ill, which will only make things worse for you. You could just as easily believe you're the best warrior in the group, and if you did it right, it might come true." Kurogi coughed into his elbow. "That won't work. If that worked, everyone would be invincible." "Not everyone can. You have a strong imagination. Probably when you were a normal dreamer, you were carefully watched by an administrator somewhere. There are limits, of course. The others in your group were born with certain powers, but they are more limited than you because they are inflexible. Conversely, any self-doubt will deprive you of all your talents, so your companions are better suited as warriors." "So if I believe we all win and I can go back to Bleak Silver, it will happen? Immediately?" "Don't be ridiculous. No one has ever been that strong, and even though you show promise, you'll probably lose steam as you get older. There are limits to what an individual can accomplish." "How do I get strong? It's not like I can just grow some self-esteem just by thinking about it. I'm sick of slowing everyone down." "Hold on." Kurogi rummaged through his bag. After a moment of searching, he pulled out a roll of wax paper. Several stickers were attached to it. "What's your favorite?" Vetiver bent over to look. There were sparkly butterflies, tawny wildcats, and watercolor flowers. "Oh, so many. I think I like that one." She pointed to a blue rose about half the size of her palm. "All right, turn around." "What's this for?" Vetiver asked as she did so. She felt Kurogi brush a wisp of hair from the back of her neck, then press something onto her skin. "Ow! That stings! What are you doing?" "There you go." Kurogi dropped the sheet back into his bag, minus the rose design. "Wait, what is this thing for?" Vetiver rubbed the back of her neck. There were no edges, but she could feel a shiny spot on her skin. "The tattoo has two purposes." Kurogi hefted his bag over his shoulder and walked back toward camp. "One, keep your friends from noticing the things you do and getting distracted. And two, as a precaution to keep you from doing anything too dangerous." "Too dangerous?" Vetiver echoed, half jogging to keep up. "Well," Kurogi hesitated. "For example, if you were feeling weak enough, you could die from a minor cut if you thought it was infected." "Oh." They were inside of camp now. Kurogi waved to Corbin, then turned and headed back the way he had come. Corbin was too busy taking down a tent to notice. "Good luck," the man called back to Vetiver. "Thanks." Vetiver sat down behind a rock and leaned back, trying to digest all the things Kurogi had told her, but her mind wandered. In camp, they would be scraping dishes and rolling up bedding. They wouldn't need her help. Yesterday morning, she had stood around asking if she could help with this or that, and bungling every task Cat gave her. A nest of red and black army ants erupted from her calf. "It's a good thing this makes it impossible to die from self-pity," Vetiver thought, touching the painful spot on the back of her neck. "I wonder if it's permanent." The ants fanned out, swarming down her leg. She tried brushing them away as she contemplated Kurogi's words. "I just need to believe? That sounds like something a psionicist would say. Do I have psionic power?" Vetiver concentrated on each ant. If she focused very hard, she could make them vanish, one at a time. "What did you do? You look all better." Vetiver hadn't noticed Hop approach. The ants were all gone now, but they had left a gaping black void in her calf. With the muscles gone, it was hard to stand up and keep her balance. "Yeah. Are we ready to go?" Hop nodded and handed Vetiver her pack. It was heavier than before. "Robert and Isla are wore out from digging all night, so I thought, since you're better, you could carry some of their stuff. Is that okay?" "Sure." Vetiver shouldered the pack and followed Hop to where the others already stood in line, waiting. "I'm glad he was able to cure you," Cat said as they began to walk. Vetiver agreed. She imagined a giant panda bear lumbering alongside them, and when she looked, it was there. Cat didn't seem to notice the huge animal. This is cool, Vetiver thought, but also kind of lonely. After an hour or so of traveling, Cat slowed to a walk beside Hop. Vetiver sped up so she could listen in. "Hop, I said I would catch you up before we left, but we've been so busy." "Yeah, I couldn't figure out much from the newspapers and things. I'll try to fill you in. It's complicated, though, and I don't know pieces to the story. Basically, you left for Tana's house on October 26. The next day, you were detected on the other side, in Bavaria, with apparently all the hairs. Your body turned up in hysteria descent a few days later, then vanished. Meanwhile, Tanith opened portals into the other side and released psionic energy into the human world, where corporations and governments rushed to harness it and started a world war with psionic weapons." "That does sound complicated. What happened to my body? And did Tanith maybe kidnap me?" "I have a pretty good hunch on your first question." Cat cast a glance back at Robert and Isla, who held the rear. "Someone stole your body, and considering how quickly you found it on your return, I'm guessing it was those guys. As for your second question, that's what everyone wants to know. Why would she kidnap you? But then, why would you be her accomplice in such a crazy plan? Maybe we'll never know." "Huh." The day wore on. Nothing happened, and no one spoke. The sky remained the same. The temperature was steady, and the sand didn't change. The straps on the back chafed Vetiver's shoulders red. She didn't think she was imagining it. Cat suggested they set up camp early. Vetiver tried to help raise tents, but she mostly got in the way. She transmuted a stack of sticks and told Hop she'd found them poking out of the dirt. He cupped his hands around them and started a cozy fire. As the sky darkened, Cat placed a can of beans in the embers to heat up. "If I'm not wrong, the glow over there is the town of Haven," she said, sitting back on her heels. "If we make it through there, we've only got Hysteria Descent to go through before Gomez's stronghold," Corbin put in. "Haven is a tough place, though. The Dreamers live to fight and will destroy anyone they can. It's in a state of constant warfare. Good thing we have Robert and Isla with us. Haven's their hometown." The weak siblings nodded. They hadn't said anything since the burial, and their silence was contagious. Vetiver stood up. She wanted to sleep, which was impossible, but laying down and resting was the next best thing. "Wait," said Cat. "I want to end the day on a brighter note. Corbin, tell us a story. A funny one." Corbin thought for a moment, then began. "One time, when Hop and I were probably about 11, we bought a goat to eat. We'd seen goats killed and butchered before, so we thought we knew what we were doing. He was a black goat, the kind with gnarly big horns and a long beard. It took a week of my wages to buy him. He was big. So I led him to a bike rack and tied his head to it with a piece of twine. I found a sheetrock knife, and Hop turned around and closed his eyes while I slit the throat. I was sure to go deep because I'd seen amateurs mess it up before. Then I said, "Eats all. Grab the hose and run some water, because if you leave blood in the heat, it rots and stinks and brings flies." So Hop brings me the communal hose, and I'm spraying the knife with it, and Eats all, Hop, grabs my arm and whispers, "Corbin, he's not dead." And his eyes are like this big around. So I look, and yeah, the goat's legs are folded up like he's resting, but his head is still up and he's looking at us. So I sneak up towards the goat, and he twitches just a little. And Hop yells, "He moved!" And I say, "Yeah, I saw." And I reach over with a sheetrock knife and re-slice his throat, and his head moves a little, but he's still looking at me. The next thing I know, Eatsall's pulling a gun from the back of his pants. Who knows where he got it? And he's shooting this otherworldly billy goat, but his hand is shaking so hard he barely clips the back of the goat's neck. I'm like, "Careful!" And I take the gun and stick the muzzle into the goat's ear and shoot, but even then, even when he almost has no head left, the goat's still sitting up staring at me. And that's when I notice the twine. And I remember that his head is tied to the bike rack. He was dead from the very beginning, but took a few years off our lives as we tried to finish him off. It was a creepy story. If I'd ever imagined Hop as a scrawny preteen, scared out of his mind, trying to kill a dead goat. She giggled, and the giggle turned into a laugh. Then she lost control and started her genuine laugh, the one that sounded like a braying donkey. Hop stared. He didn't realize such a huge, awful sound could come from Vetiver. Corbin laughed at Vetiver's laugh, which set her off even worse. Vetiver bit the corners of her mouth, trying to straighten her face, but her body refused to obey her brain's commands. Her stomach hurt, and she could feel her cheeks flushing bright red. She hadn't laughed this hard in months, not since before she'd left Bleaksilver. Tears spilled over onto her face. Everyone was laughing at how hard she was laughing, even Cat, who was trying to get them to stop. The spell lasted for nearly 10 minutes, until Vetiver ran out of air and flopped back into the sand, gasping for breath. Finally she was calm enough to say, "Corbin, that was a funny story." "You seem to think so, at least," he agreed. "Now that I know about your ridiculous laugh, I'll have to tell more of them." "Oh no!" Vetiver snickered, and Cat, sensing another explosion of donkey sounds, told her to go to bed. "Rest up for tomorrow," Isla called, as Vetiver crawled through the tent flap. "I will." She was able to forget her maladies for the night. Because she forgot them, they ceased to exist. The tent sounded like it was in its death throes. Wind thrashed back and forth, folding and snapping the fabric. A tear grew stitch by stitch along the roof seam. Vetiver lay on her back, stretched to her limit so her feet held one side of the tent and her fingers the other. The wind wasn't her fault. She hadn't even been thinking of wind when Cat had mentioned it. The weather had worsened as soon as the sun set. Vetiver had thought it would die down in the night, but the gusts only increased in intensity. She felt like Jonah in the whale's belly. The folds of the tent seemed like stomach lining, rolling and contracting, growling, digesting her, submerging her in stomach acid. Hot, almost unbearably hot, and close, and hard to breathe. Vetiver looked over at Cat, who slept on despite the noise. She was actually the one holding the tent down, her heavy boots pinning one edge to the ground, and her heavy forearm flung up to secure the other wall. Ow! Vetiver's cheek stung. She touched it, and her fingers stung as well. Acid burns. She knew what those felt like. If she ignored them, and thought of something else, they would fade away. The tattoo Kurogi had placed on the back of her neck seemed to be working. A mosquito hovered around her head. She couldn't see it, but she'd been listening to it whine around the tent for hours. The fabric had finally torn enough to let in a moonbeam, and the bloodsucker made the mistake of flying into the light. Whap! Vetiver clapped her hands, but she missed. Cat made a sleepy sound beside her. There it was again. Vetiver slashed the air and squeezed, and when she opened her hand, the mosquito was there, wriggling its hairy legs as if signaling, "Mayday! Mayday!" She squeezed again. It must have bitten Cat at some point in the night, because when Vetiver opened her hand, all that remained of the insect was a red smear that collected itself into a single drop that rolled off her palm and into the dirt. Vetiver looked over at Cat. She was still fast asleep. When she looked back at the ground, the blood had vanished. Hours later, Vetiver was confused by the sound of heavy traffic. She shook Cat. "What's going on?" Cat sat up and shushed her. After a moment listening, she asked, "Did Hop have the last watch?" "Yeah, I think so." Cat slipped her knife from its sheath and crept out of the tent. Vetiver followed. A black overpass slashed a stark line through a dim, smoggy sky. Cars streamed overhead, honking as they rushed away. A murky river lurked to the left, and the right was cut off by a sheer concrete wall. 20 feet away, a barrel filled with burning garbage cast a dim halo around a knot of men. "What's going on?" Vetiver repeated. "We're in someone's dream." Corbin emerged from a shadow. "Yeah, I've been looking for a way out, but this one is pretty realistic. I'm guessing it's a place on the other side the dreamer knows well. Also, he's got Hop." He gestured to the men. "I think I know which one he is." Cat and Corbin walked toward the people, but when Vetiver followed, Cat stopped her. "You stay by the tent." "But—" Cat glared at her, and the protest died in Vetiver's mouth. She hung behind while the grown-ups approached the men and said something. Vetiver couldn't hear a thing, so she made herself invisible and followed at a distance. Hop sat on the ground next to the burn barrel, blood dripping from his nose. The men had secured his arms with rotting electrical wire. One spoke to Cat. "What a pretty creature! Hey, do you happen to know this bloke?" "Yes, he's our friend. Please let him go." "Nope, he's an informer. You're free to leave, miss, but we're fixin' to fix him, if you know what I mean. Make better friends next time, eh?" "All right, Cat," Corbin said. "I'm going to No, let me try first." Cat placed her hand on the man's shoulder. "Sir, there's some mistake. This man—" "Why are you touching me? You're creeping me out." The man flung Cat away. Before he could draw his hand back to his body, Corbin closed in, thudding 2 fingers into the dreamer's chest. The man's coat flaked away, then his shirt, then pale skin that turned gray, brown, black at Corbin's touch. The dreamer cursed, his voice wavering. "Hoo-ha! Who—" Corbin's fingers slipped through skin, flesh, between ribs, and finally touched the man's heart. He went limp, wilting to the ground like a poisoned weed. Yellow-tinged fog swirled around his body, radiating outward until it engulfed everything. When the fog cleared, Vetiver was standing outside her tent, in the vastness of instability. Robert and Isla ran to Hop, who lay on his back a few yards away. The restraints were gone, but his nose still bled. "Are you all right? It looked like you got caught in a dream. We tried to break in, but—" "I'm fine." Hop looked embarrassed. "I didn't realize what was happening. Let's get going." After a light breakfast, the group packed up and continued on. Hop had a slight limp, but otherwise seemed fine. Although Vetiver spotted a few sandstorm-like disturbances throughout the day, no dreamers came near. At dusk, they reached Haven. Cat led them to a sheltered shelf of rock overlooking the town, and they set up camp as silently as possible. After a supper of cold beans, Vetiver turned in early with Cat, who fell asleep in minutes. Vetiver stretched out, resting her body.